Welcome to my 2025 Wrapped. Hi, welcome back to 500 Hobbies. My name is Amanda, and this is the place on the internet where I get to talk about my hobbies. So for my last video of 2025, I thought it would be fun to kind of do a rundown of all the hobbies related, mostly knitting related stuff that I've done this year, as well as take a look back at the knitting goals that I made for 2025 back in January to see how far I've come in relation to those. So I looked through my Ravelry, which I have been using a lot more frequently this year, and that was kind of intentional. And I found that I made 10 larger garments this year. So that's sweaters, vests, cardigans. I made 8 hats. I remember doing that all in the month of January for people. 4 scarves, including 2 Sophie hoods that I made only in the last couple weeks. And then 1 accessory, which are hand knit golf head covers that my dad requested a couple weeks ago. So it's pretty crazy when you are able to look back at the stats like that. I can't imagine that I made 10 large garments, and I feel like a lot of that knitting was done kind of in the later half of the year. So I'm hoping I kind of hold on to that momentum as we go into 2026. And I thought about doing like a really long video where I walked through every single one of those garments. And that just seemed kind of overwhelming, I think, both for me and for you. So I thought it would be better for me to kind of just go through my very favorite projects of the year. So I have 5 things that I'm going to talk about. So the first project I want to talk about is my favorite from 2025, and that is the Clematis sweater Chunky. This is a pattern by Emma Knits that I had mentioned during my knitting podcast. I saw a lot of other knitting podcasts that I watch make. It features this really unique diagonal button band, which really interested me in terms of construction and also style. This is an Aran weight sweater, so it's a little bit on the heavier side. So I started this probably in only the last couple months of the year. So it was kind of the perfect time to cast on something a little bit heavier. This is also my favorite, I think, because toward the end of 2025, I really tried to be more intentional with the projects that I was taking on and the yarn I was using. So really trying to complement my closet with unique pieces that I would have a hard time finding in the store. So I was able to use this really nice variegated yarn from KnitPicks that was 100% superwash merino. It was the Muse Aran in color Focus Tonal. And I also held it double with Mohair from Lana Grossa and some that I had thrifted. So I felt like overall it was great because I was able to add this really unique piece to my closet and also get rid of some of my thrifted yarn. The construction was really interesting, and I think that I will probably cast on another in 2026. Maybe the lighter weight version in case I am casting on in the spring or the summer. Second, I'll talk about the Ingrid sweater. This is a gift knit that I did for my brother, and I'm going to gift in the next couple days. This one had been on my list for such a long time that it just feels like a really big milestone to say that I've knit an Ingrid sweater. You can see that this has all over texture pretty much, and I found it really fun to do all the different types of textures, especially the mock cables. So I think even though it's just a large undertaking to take on like a men's sweater compared to what I would do for myself, the textures really kept me motivated and interested in the pattern, and I think maybe that's why people like the Ingrid sweater so much. I made it in Knitting for Olive heavy merino, and that was my first time using that yarn, and that had been kind of on my wish list for this year as well. I really enjoyed this pattern, and I think my brother's really going to like it. I think it's the most professional one that I've done. My husband, who sees everything I knit, said that he thinks that's the best sweater that I've ever done from a technical practical standpoint, so that was nice to hear. It introduced me to the double folded neckline, which I will definitely be incorporating into future knits as well. And my husband also liked the Ingrid sweater so much that I have bought yarn to make him one in the new year. And I have also toyed around with the idea with making myself one and making a little bit longer to make it into kind of like a sweater dress. I think I would get a lot of wear out of that. So obviously would knit again, and I think will knit again. I already have the yarn for my second Ingrid, so that is definitely going to happen in 26. The last sweater that I'll talk about is the Goji sweater. This was something that I cast on really early in the year, and it was my first, or the yarn that I had bought was like for my first like knitting for olive experience. So it was merino and the soft silk mohair in the color artichoke purple. The Goji sweater was on my list for a long time as well. It was kind of my first introduction to some kind of lace work, doing like yarn overs to make those little holes that look like goji berries. This is a really oversized sweater that I think honestly is a little bit too oversized for me personally, so I wear it a lot at home or when we're running errands. It's super warm and cozy, so I love to wear it, and the color is one that I don't have a lot in my wardrobe, so I think that was a nice addition too. It's the only sweater that I've ever completed that uses seaming instead of knitting in the round, so I think it was a good experience to do that. That's not my favorite construction, having done it in addition to other constructions this year, but I can kind of see the appeal in not having to carry around the whole sweater when you're working on it. So I could kind of see why some people might prefer it. It was kind of nice to be able to, you know, go to a coffee shop and just take a sleeve or something with me instead of taking the whole garment, which you have to do when you're knitting in the round. The next thing I'll talk about is just kind of in general. This was the year that I started to understand why people like vests and slipovers so much. I think partially it was the algorithm, so I was getting a lot of those types of garments on my feed. But also I think working from home and maybe just like getting into my 30s, I really appreciated a garment that you can just throw over whatever else you're wearing. And I think from a knitting standpoint, it was just nice not to have to knit sleeves. So I did a few this year, mostly based off this free pattern that I found for a chunky vest that I've kind of modified as needed to fit the yarn that's in my stash. So I did a couple of those, and I am hoping to do more. I know that I'm going to be returning to the office after years of working at home, and I think a couple vests will be a really nice complement to my work wardrobe. And then the last kind of project by name that I want to talk about is something that I've only cast on within the last month, which is the Sophie hood. I saw a bunch of these online, as anyone I think who knits and is on Instagram has seen. These are super popular right now. I really liked the look of it, but I think I just resisted it because it was so popular, and I had done a lot of petite knit patterns this year. But I think it was right after Thanksgiving. I was kind of going through my stash, and I had a lot of like excess mohair and the like from like previous projects that I'd completed this year. And I just started to get really into the idea of having this like dusty blue Sophie hood. So I had a dream about that. I woke up, I bought the pattern. I woke up and I bought the pattern and I cast it on. And I think if you subtract the time that I had to wait for another skein of mohair to arrive, I think I finished it in under a week. So it's a really addictive knit. And I think I messed it up a little bit the first time I did it. But now that I've done two, I think the pattern is really easy to follow. and I think are very good holiday gifts. So last year I did a bunch of hats for people, and this year I feel like gifting a bunch of Sophie hoods is kind of like a nice elevated version of that. So I've done two. The first I used, I think it's called Amano yarns. It's kind of similar to, in terms of feel, it reminds me of the Knitting for Olive Merino. So I held that with the Knitting for Olive Mohair. This was leftover yarn that I had from the Carl Johan sweater that I completed earlier in the year. And then I also had some Alpaca Upcycled worsted from KnitPicks that I had bought a long time ago and had been in my to be a whip pile for a while. And I thought, let's just cast something on with this and stop letting it sit in the yarn cabinet. And I just really liked that kind of olive tone to it. So I finished that recently as well, and I plan to cast on some more before the end of the year. In terms of knitting goals, the big three that I had was to try cables for the first time. And I completed that in January by completing a cable knit scarf. Have not really touched cables since then. I'm not really sure why. I guess I just haven't really been drawn to a pattern yet that features having to use a cable needle, but it's not on purpose. I think that was a milestone because I had thought that was kind of like a technical roadblock for me for a really long time. And so now, having done some simple cables, I definitely have a little bit more confidence when I do find a pattern that inspires me. The second was to participate in a knit along or crochet along. I did not really find one that fit what I was working on. I think maybe because I already had so much in the queue, it was hard for me to tack on something else. But now I think I've cleared out the queue a little bit more. I will be keeping an eye open for something like that in 2026. Third, I wanted to decrease my yarn stash. And I'll just be honest, I have no idea how many skeins of yarn I have at this point. I do think in general it's decreased, or at least I've been able to shove more in the yarn cabinet than I had previously. I keep most of it in a cabinet, and then I had some in these baskets outside the cabinet, and now everything fits in the cabinet. So maybe I'm just shoving things in more snugly, but I would say overall, I think I have decreased it. We recently found out that we are going to be doing a cross-country move. So in 2026, before we move, I am going to be really dedicated to getting that yarn stash down even further. And I think that'll really, I need to think about it as like a way to free up space so I can buy more yarn when we get there. So that is what I plan on. So that is what I planned to work on this year. And I think overall, I have achieved those goals. And over the holidays, I'm going to think very deeply about what I would like to work on in 2026. And so when I come back after the holidays, we will talk about those goals. And so lastly, I also want to touch upon some non-knitting hobbies that I've gotten into this year. I've tried a lot of different things this year. We took a pottery class, which is where I found out it's a lot harder than it looks. I bought a watercolor set. I started to do some embroidery. But I would say the two hobbies that I have added in a meaningful and significant way is brewing kombucha at home. I did a short video on that. I haven't done more just because I don't think that I'm the person that people should be learning how to make kombucha from. But my friend and I did kind of like a long distance friend thing in parallel where we both bought the kombucha kit in the spring of this year. And it's been really fun to kind of like experiment flavors and kind of apply what I already know from like sourdough baking and other fermentation hobbies to kombucha. I will say I think I will have a better time with it once we move closer to my friends and family that drink kombucha, because my husband doesn't drink it and it's a lot to go through when it's just you. But I think that's been really fun and had also been on my list to try for a long time. And then I think kind of in the second half of the year, my brother started running, and I had been wanting to pick up a more active hobby. So I started doing it as well. And I think joining Strava really helped because I could see when he was running and he could see when I was running, and it became like not a really tough competition, but it did encourage us, I think, to get out there more. So I'm turning 30 next year, and I feel like that's when everyone is trying to run a marathon. And I'm not necessarily trying to do that, but I think it has been really fun for me to kind of like be in competition with myself and try to get faster and just get out there more and more. I will say now that the temperatures have dropped, what I've determined is that what I like about running is just really being outside. And I think it's a good excuse and reason to get outside every day. And it was a good thing to try and like plan my other things around. So I'll say like running on a treadmill does not really appeal to me, but I am going to try and do that a little bit more while it's cold, just so I can kind of keep up until the temperatures are nice outside again. So that is all I really had to share for my 2025 hobbies wrapped. I think it's pretty interesting, and I also recommend doing this kind of look back as you progress through your own activities. I think it's pretty amazing. Like in the beginning of the year, I was intimidated by cables and had not really knit many garments, and now I've done 10 sweaters in a year. And I think it makes me kind of proud to look at things like that. And it also like makes me really excited to just continue growing with this hobby and setting goals for the new year and just adding more and more to my wardrobe through yarn. So thank you for tuning in with me, whether this is your first video or you've watched a couple through the year. I'm having a lot of fun doing this, and I'm really happy that you guys are along for the journey with me. So happy holidays, and I'll see you in 2026.